So today's topic is Newcomer Talent. How can we best take advantage of opportunity? Hey, Kathy, glad to see you.
Yes, just call me Red.
Hello, Red.
Oh, yeah, good to
Woo! I'm glad it's not 3 weeks before the wedding.
Oh, you're funny. Okay, so we this is a good group. Hi, Josh. Good to see you.
Hi.
We all know the virtual practice reminders. You're a good group that's been here plenty of times before. So use your chat. Use your video today if you have it. We'd love to see your face. It's going to be a lot of conversation today, and it's going to be rich conversation. I'm excited about it. So the topic is newcomers, and we're going to do a quick review, check-in question. We're going to have a lot of discussion and then talk about some upcoming events and then do a checkout. So we should be out of here by 4 o'clock, but we hope that you can stay and enjoy the conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Mike, we can't hear you.
It's now you can hear me. So again, here's what I would say. Thank you all for joining here the day after the 4th of July, and we appreciate that you're here with us. We're going to do a little different process today. We're going to push back the check-in question a little bit and try to just hone in on the article and remember some of these details that we might have already heard in the or read in the article. But this story really captivated me when I first read it. And I think the circumstances can be different in our communities, but something like this plays out regularly. There's somebody new who comes to town who has great ideas. We want to take advantage of them. And yet there's this conflict where somehow we're just not connecting with them, and there's a challenge in there. So I also think that this conversation about this topic is very poignant coming right after Rural X. You know, at Rural X, we were thinking about how can we be change makers? And as change makers, our job is to try to help other people make things happen. And so, you know, in that catalyst role, I think we'd like to just have you think about that today. And so what can we do to help reduce these tensions and really take advantage of any newcomers who are moving to our communities? So as I shared just a moment ago, we want to kick off with a little bit of some details and help put this article back in everybody's mind. We know it was long, and maybe you didn't even get a chance to read the whole thing. So I've asked Jamie if she would share some facts, just share a little bit about what she remembers from the article, and I'd invite you to remember, to just listen and to try to remember what you found thought of from the article. And Paula, if you could switch to the next slide as well. I'm just going to share, you know, what our check-in question is going to be. And so, yeah, well, first let's have Jamie go ahead and share, and then I'd invite everybody to just think about what caught your attention from the article, and we'll come back to you in a moment. So Jamie, take it away.
Okay, so here are some of the facts that I read in this article. Joe Kapp and his partner, Carlos Gutierrez, went to a West Virginia cabin in Lost River, and that was in 2012, and they went their first sabbatical. Kapp, while there, he ends up working with Eastern West Virginia Community and Technical College, and they work together to launch the Institute for Rural Entrepreneurship and Economic Development, which they call IREAD as the acronym. He then helped the college secure a $15,000 grant to get that started, and later helped raise an additional $767,000 to support IREAD. And that also included his position as an entrepreneur in residence with the program. And that started in 2014. And then he started a business incubator as part of this called the New Biz Launchpad in 2015. And Cap volunteered to teach an entrepreneurship course at Eastern Community College originally in 2012. Then in nearby Wardensville, domestic partners Donald Hitchcock and Paul Yandura had purchased a number of properties on the main street there in town, and they opened up a real estate agency. They opened up a coffee, wine, craft beer, and craft store, and they also opened up a nonprofit garden market and a bakery. And then Cap ends up purchasing 2 buildings in Wardensville on Main Street as well, and he opens up the new biz launchpad there. And in Wardensville, not everyone was happy about Hitchcock, Yandura, or Cap's changes to the community. In fact, some community members were feeling like their town was being gentrified. Cap was offered an unpaid position as the head of Wardensville Development Authority. And in doing that, he replaced a local business owner and 6th-generation resident who was in that position. In June 2015, someone started an anonymous Facebook page called Good News Wardensville, and it was critical of his work. And later, on that page, it had homophobic and anti-Semitic posts. The page was not supported by all of the local townspeople, and some of them actually spoke out against it. In the meantime, Cap ended up buying more fire insurance when there was a threat to burn down the launch pad, and he started his own Facebook page called Whiz of Biz. Good News Warrensville ends up ending its Facebook posting in May of 2016. Later on, Cap helped entrepreneur Josh Fry develop his struggling business of creating poultry biochar for soil amendment of heavy metal runoff, and he helped Fry to reach investors and clients. iRead created an online marketplace where farmers and buyers could connect. It hosted a conference where farmers can scout out and present new technologies, and it hosts monthly educational workshops. Cap is currently working on a program to allow community college to offer no or low interest microloans of about $5,000 to entrepreneurs. And then the entrepreneurs would then take entrepreneurship classes and business development courses at that lending college. A grant was awarded in part to his program to introduce entrepreneurship to 8 community colleges across Appalachia, and then that also includes curriculum resources for 28,000 K through 12 grade students. Those are the facts that I scoped out from that article. So I'll hand it back to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. So, a lot going on in this article, and I was sharing earlier that it took me an hour to read it the last time because I was just trying to look at it and consume it, and a lot's going on. So let's come back and let's do our check-in here now that we've got that kind of fresh in our minds. As you think back to what you read yourself and or what Jamie just shared with you, what caught your attention? What are some of those facts that really just jump out and you think are just really important about this? Just share what you think as a part of your check-in. What's one thing that stood out? Now, we did list the call-in order in the chat box. And so it looks like, Amanda, you're up first. If you would just share your check-in and then pass it on to the next person in the chat box, and we'll go down the line. Remember that everybody doesn't have a view of the chat box if they're on the road. So thanks. Go ahead, Amanda. You ready?
Hi, this is Amanda from Lennox, and I only was able to read about half of the article before we started, but what caught my attention was the Cap's background and what he was doing for a living and then what he transitioned into. And I find that very interesting. It seems like it's quite a jump and very different from what he had started out doing at his career path. So, I will pass it on to Melissa.
Hey everybody, it's Melissa in Webster, and I think what stood out for me is maybe this is like a little infomercial for the Empower stuff, but like the importance of like having those gatherings to have everybody there and have the opportunity to share their ideas and figure out what they want to do next. Because sometimes, you know, as the article was, you know, maybe you're doing great things, but the perception of, you know, other people might not think it's as great. So I don't know. That just kind of was sticking out for me. So I will pass it on to Rita.
Hi, this is Rita. Yes, I guess what jumped out at me right away was, of course, the rural center he got going, and kind of wishing he was here in DeSmith. That's what I was thinking. Anyway, I will pass it on to Cheyenne.
Hey. Well, what stood out, Cheyenne McGrath from Law. And what stood out for me was, I might not say this correctly, the anonymity of the Facebook page. And I have a feeling that no one brought that to his attention, to his face. Everything was just behind closed doors, and he was never approached about people having concerns. That stood out to me. And I will pass to Tammy and Miller.
I think the thing that really caught my attention was that he just wasn't knowing his audience. He came in with some really great work and really good intentions, but all that is void if you don't know your audience. And the part that just leaped out at me was when he didn't know the difference between hay and straw, and he was in a rural community. And I am passing to Kathy.
Hi, this is Kathy in Lemon, and I'm surprised nobody has said anything. Didn't he talk about tromping through the chicken muck? I've raised chickens before, and I've only done it once. And I am going to pass to Josh in Freeman.
Yeah, one thing that was interesting to me was I was trying to like ferret out like the social connections of these people, and it was kind of interesting the role of Hitchcock and Yandura in this story, because it really wasn't a story of Cap in isolation, but in essence, his story kind of, it seemed like some of the unfortunate things that were happening were attached to this pair that he was being associated with. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a takeaway, but I'm trying to get like through like the actual complexity of the story, and there seems to be like they even reference that other 2017 story, which I haven't read, but there's like a story within a story here connected to Hitchcock and Yandura. So pass to Trevor and Faulkton.
Yep, this is Trevor Kramer in Faulkton at Faulkton Area Economic Development. And I guess what jumped out at me is that he was trying to do good things, but maybe didn't go about it quite right, and got, obviously on the Facebook page, got hit pretty hard. So that's what jumped out at me.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. And Joan, so we're just going through the check-in welcome, and we have already shared a little bit of details about what this story is about. I'm not sure, were you able to read the story before you came today?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you may be too fresh here, but new to the conversation, but if you want to answer the check-in question, we invite you to do so, or feel free to pass.
You know what? I lost a diamond in my ring just 5 minutes ago, and I'm just sick. So I'm just going to listen, and I'm good.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing that. And as always, and we don't say this enough because we think it's assumed, anytime you're not ready to answer, you always feel free to pass, and that's fine. Yeah. So, Paula has been taking some notes about what you shared, and also has taken and identified some of those things that Jamie has shared as well. Paula, are you able to list those things on the screen here right now?
Yep, I'll swap this out just a minute.
Yeah. So I want you to just take a look at some of these facts some of these things that you've identified here so far. And then as you look them over, we just want to say, what have we missed? Are there some other important things that are important here that we want to capture? So just look that over. So does anybody see something else that they'd like to lift up as a part of an important part of this story that we can add to the list here? Feel free to either speak verbally or type it into the chat box. Is there anything else in here? Yeah.
I
so
can
Paula,
oh,
go ahead.
This is Rita. I can see it happening in our communities in a different way, kind of behind the scenes. I maybe didn't go on Facebook, but your local coffee groups and some of the people that get envious of the things you're doing. And so I can see it locally happening in our small communities, especially DeSmit. And so I think we have to watch that we don't fall into that trap ourselves.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that, Rita. And you're actually jumping into some of the conversation that we want to have in a little bit about how is this maybe similar or different in our own communities. One of the things that I think is actually important about this as well is that we haven't mentioned, that his homosexuality that may have played a role in this whole story. And that becomes really tricky. It's something that we don't talk about very often, but I think that we just at least have to acknowledge that and to at least say that was a part of this story here. And it's interesting for me as well to hear that he didn't think that many of the conflicts were really centered around that, but they seem to be swirling in it, just as Josh has noted earlier as well, that the work of the other couple who had actually been helping develop businesses in the community, how that had got rolled into this. Okay? Yeah, so as we talk about this a little bit more, and I've got a series of questions that we'll try to look at, but as we talk about this, let's try to look at it from the dual lenses of both the newcomer and the existing residents. Let's not try to place blame, but to really recognize that everybody has room for improvement. And our goal is really to figure out what this might mean here in our own communities. And to remember that each community is going to be different, right? Each of our communities is going to be different from each other, just as we're different from West Virginia. So the first question that I really want you to share a little bit about, and I'd invite you to share verbally on this question. What are some parts of this story that reminded you of your own community? Have you seen this happen in your community, in other communities that are maybe near you? And what are some of those similarities and differences?
Well, I know that Paula said this earlier today, but sometimes people who have lived here for many years still feel like outsiders, like they're not part of the community here. And that makes me feel bad when I hear people saying that.
Yeah. I wonder if he even felt like he was an insider already, and then he actually realized that he was an outsider. Thanks for sharing. And what else?
Well, I think the same, this is Rita, I think the same that I just said was that the local coffee shop is kind of the same as Facebook in a way. the local coffee shop will do that same thing.
Yeah, it's its own network, isn't it? It's its own face-to-face network where some of these same things might happen and you may never even hear about them. Thanks.
This is Tammy from Miller. I think there's often lack of trust when new ideas or new people come into town, and especially if they're coming in with money. I think that alarmed the locals, and I think the same is true here. When somebody comes in with money and they want to invest in your town, you're always thinking, well, why? What is it they're wanting from us? And I think they made reference to the exploitation of the rural area there too. And I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, I thought that part was interesting as well. The connection between the feeling that people have that others are going to take advantage of them.
This is Cheyenne from Law, and mine is two-sided. On one side, seeing the sabotage of an idea based on something people don't fully understand and not taking it to the people that actually are involved with the process. And on the other side of that, a lack of education in the community of what's actually going on.
And do you think that those are similarities in your community, our communities, or are they more about differences?
Well, I think it's similar to this story in that people were upset about what he was trying to do. But on the other side, was he doing enough to educate the community about what he was trying to do?
All right. Oh, thanks.
This is Joan. And are you able to hear me?
We are.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that with Cheyenne, and I think I've moved into a lot of different communities, and I think sometimes the key is they're just all different. And but I do think sometimes joining in is crucial if it's getting involved in a Kiwanis or Lions, and get the feel first, because then when you come in with all of your ideas and you come from another community and they did this and we did this, that's very threatening, and it would be threatening to anybody. So I really think you got to take that time to get involved first and let them get to know you and vice versa.
So Joan, would you consider that a similarity to what's happening in your community, or is that a real difference?
I think, well, let's see, this has probably been the easiest community of ours to move into. So I guess it would be a similarity, or no, it would be a difference.
On go, Joan.
Well, maybe that was somebody else talking to you, Joan. Maybe it was somebody online. I'm not sure. I didn't hear that comment, and if that needs to be repeated, please do so, somebody.
This is Trevor in Faulkton, and I think there's that delicate balance of people that accept change and people that do not accept change, no matter who's in charge of it or who's responsible for it, and that is that conflict between members of communities on whether to do it or not. Some want it to stay the same way it always is, and others want it to be something else.
And you would find that to be true in your community as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. And so it seems like we've really focused on a lot of similarities here, right? And that's fine. And we can come back to identifying any differences if somebody else has something that they want to share. But I want to move to our next question, which we're already starting to talk a little bit about. And that's really, what do you think got in the way of the community and Joe Cap from working together? What were those things? And I think, Joan, you probably identified one of them right away. You're surprised that he didn't try to join more cautiously. That might have got in the way, right? Yeah. If we're going to make a quick list, what are the other things that might have got in the way?
I think Joe, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't give this instruction right away, but I wanted to say, and we want to look at this both from the community standpoint and the newcomer standpoint. So it could be in either space. Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Tammy from Miller. I think Joe subconsciously thought he was a little bit better than the locals. And so I think when he got blasted with some humility along the way, I think it woke him up to the fact that, you know, you maybe don't know what's best, especially if you're leaving them out. So I think subconsciously he really thought he was better than they were because he maybe had more money. And after all, he was on a sabbatical, you know, which they never would be on probably.
Interesting.
Yeah, kind of pompous, I think, because he came in and thought, oh, we could do all this and stuff. And I think that's a lot of it with him, too. I agree with Tammy.
Well, and I think part of it, this is Rita, I think part of it, too, when they had seen people that come in from a larger community or someplace that they think that we're all kind of a bunch of hicks here and that we've never ever heard of such a thing or thought of such a thing because we're just in this rural area that isn't up to modern times. It was part of their maybe not thinking so much that he was better, but that he knew more because he came from came to a rural community.
Thanks.
This is Joan again. Think about that Rural X conference and about leadership being obsolete. And I've thought about this a lot here in the last several days. And I just really think that there comes a point, too, where when do we accept them for what they are? And I think you do need to get in and change from within, not change from without. So it's going to be maybe 2 years being a president of a club or whatever. It takes a long time. And I think we come in and think, okay, we got great ideas and blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, so what does that mean? When you think about that, you're talking about an interesting thing there, Joan. I mean, you're saying that our communities don't change real fast. Is that something that got in the way?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that it is educating them. It's planting that seed, and it takes a long time, and it just and then to cultivate it and to remind them and bringing them into the circle of the thought, to change the thought, and it just takes time. And I think sometimes they want to move in because they have great ideas, and we have great ideas, but if they're not ready, they're not ready. You can't change it.
Yeah, so if the community isn't ready, you can't change them.
Well, not that fast.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah.
I have something. Josh from Freeman. I thought that there was no point in the story that there was like, I'm of the belief that there needs to be, that often it can be curbed, that this kind of problem can be curbed by an intermediary. So if you have, like I have this situation in a couple of things that I've experienced in coming back to Freeman, and these kind of ideas need to be channeled through a person or your community champion and Cap never found that. Cap used other outsiders. He never channeled his energy through a lens that was like, it never seemed to jive. They talk about that the woman mayor that didn't do that kind of flew and burned, and maybe she was that, but I never really got the sense that like he was translating himself through the lens of what he needed. He didn't understand the cultural landscape well enough to do that.
Oh, thanks, Josh. And we may be coming back to that topic a little bit later because it sounds like you've experienced that as a young person moving or coming into your community. What about the differences side? So not on the differences, the community side. What did the community do that kind of got in the way? What was it that what's their role in this?
This is Tammy from Miller. I think the community was, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. I think they just thought they were probably just okay the way they were, and they hadn't looked beyond themselves.
Okay, thanks. And what else? Yeah.
This is Melissa, and I think Cheyenne brought it up before, is that, some people started that Facebook page and voiced their concerns there instead of talking to him about, how they would like to see it happen, and, therefore working with him.
Yeah.
Well.
So why do you think they created the Facebook page rather than go talk to him? Anybody want to take that question? I'm not just throwing that to you, Melissa, but feel free to chime in. Why the Facebook page?
I think that's a coward's easy way out.
Yeah.
It's easy to complain online, but it's not easy to tell someone to their face how you feel about an issue, or they're possibly afraid if they brought it to the person involved, they would be challenged to come up with an answer or other ideas.
Thank you.
I kind of wondered, this is Joan, about, you remember the movie Hoosiers? And they had a town meeting, and I wonder if he even considered something like just to let him know what he's planning, just part of the education process, but to let them voice their concerns. Then they may have still made the Facebook page, because some were probably very threatened, but I wonder if he even thought of that. And that would be a small community part of the landscape.
Yeah, thank you. So as we look at these things, one of the things that jumps out at me as I look at both sides, the blue and the orange, is that most of the things on the blue might have a counterweight to the right. And I just want to lift this up, and I'll pose it as a question. But I wonder if, while Joe may have been a little arrogant in his approach, I wonder if the mindsets of the current residents might have been a little bit about having an inferiority complex, and if that didn't lead to just making that arrogance even stronger or appear even stronger. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. But sometimes I wonder if that doesn't somehow hold us back, that we're part of the problem without even realizing it.
I mentioned that in a comment that I had on the base camp too, about, I call it a poverty mindset. And I'm not talking about economic poverty. I'm just talking about the poverty that we, the stories we tell ourselves, like, oh, we're just this little town. We don't deserve to have it all. Or we're just a rural place. We don't need anything fancy, right? And we have this mentality about city people bringing their fancy ideas to us. That's my interpretation of that. And I think a lot of us have that.
I also wonder about, this is total speculation, but it makes me think about my own community. And I wonder if part of it could be just kind of this adherence to an older hierarchical sort of system, where if there are community members in town that don't feel empowered, then it can seem like this person who has come into the community and suddenly is taking on a leadership role has kind of overstepped his place in line, so to speak. So it can feel like, whereas maybe they do have the empowerment, but they're not taking up the opportunity, or maybe they don't know how to go about it. Now somebody has just stepped right in because they thought that they could do it and they did it. And that can feel a little bit unnerving for people.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. Does that play out as well with younger adults moving back to a community? Yeah. So let's move on to the next question, which is really, what might be getting in the way in your community for newcomers and the rest of the communities from working together? Are there some things going on there that you can identify?
This is Melissa. And there's a couple things that are going on lately, and I think it just boils down to the people in the different sides. They don't come to one place to have the conversation with everybody in the room so you can figure it all out. I guess I'm a firm believer in why have two separate meetings when you can have one meeting, hash it all out, and then everyone knows what is being said by everyone else. And then you don't have to say, well, I don't know what they are thinking, but this is what I think they're thinking. And it just kind of eliminates all of that, and you can hash it out a lot faster. I don't know if any of that made any sense.
I think it did, and I think that Paul has been capturing in here. But it's when we start breaking up into smaller groups and we just have our conversations with our own immediate friends, and we don't reach out and build the relationships with other people.
This is Tammy and Miller, and I know some of the newcomers in our area say that, well, all of you are related. And so you all know each other really well, and they just feel like it's a barrier. And a lot of us have been here since we were kids, and so that longevity of our citizens, and we know the history, and we know the history of the families, and so those are barriers that I think are more solid than we realize. I know it's kind of surprising to me because I've always been here. So I think that's part of it too.
Thank you.
This is Cheyenne, and I have been told really often by new people that our community is very cliquey, and it's hard to get into a friend group. So my question is that a truth in some ways, or are there just not opportunities for newcomers to get involved, or do they know how to get involved? And what does get involved mean when you're looking for your friend group?
Yeah, I'm always reminded to inviting somebody to participate in our economic development committee and board actually, and somebody who just moved in, and he shared with us that he's lived there for 2 years and he still didn't feel a part of the community, even though his wife was from there. And that was really an interesting observation on his part. And everybody will wave at you. Everybody says hi. Do they really engage you and make it feel like you have a relationship with them? And sometimes it's easier for some people than others. Is that also true? But some people just are naturally good at going into a new place and connecting. What else might be going on in your community? Anything else? Any other barriers?
In Lion.
Board, but...
Sorry, Mike, I cut you off.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was going to say in Lions, language is a barrier. And this goes for both the newcomer side and the community side. For example, we have a number of Hispanic families who have moved to Lions, and some of them primarily speak only Spanish, and it makes it very hard for them to connect with the community or find a leadership role because they don't know the language, and vice versa. A lot of probably a majority of folks in Lions speak English primarily, and so it makes them that hard for the community to connect with these newcomers as well.
Yeah, do you think it has to be a cultural language barrier, or are there other forms where that language barrier happens? Have you witnessed anything like that, Jamie?
Yeah, I think it's both between like Spanish and English, but then also the cultural perceptions that people have from experiences growing up that differ from the cultural experiences that have happened throughout the course of time in Lions. And so sometimes people can get caught up in that kind of almost like this sort of perspective that Joe Cap had about how things work, or getting caught in the language of how an incubator, that he was going to use that term for business, meant an entirely different thing for the people in the rural place. So I see that happening too.
I would like to say that vocabulary is sometimes even a barrier. So I can't remember exactly in the story where it talked about a certain, incubator. Incubator meant something with chickens, right? So he called his business incubator and it didn't make sense. I think Dakota Resources uses a vocabulary that sometimes doesn't connect with rural communities. And I think that can sometimes be a barrier if we're using words that mean something different to them.
This is Joan. That incubator is so key, because when we had our 2 incubators, the kitchen and business, I had no idea what an incubator was. And so nobody else does. And now when we named it Community Kitchen, they all think we're feeding the poor. And it's kind of like, man, that verbiage better be right. But it is true.
Yes, thanks for sharing those examples.
So this is Christy, and I think perceptions versus reality gets in the way as well with in our community. And it's interesting when you just have conversation, how the barrier can break down. And a number of you have mentioned that today. The other thing that I want to hold up too is sometimes, and I think it was Josh maybe who said this, or Tammy, about that entry point of how to get involved in your communities. Again, perceptions versus realities, in that people are welcome, they're welcoming, but the new people don't know that either. And it's just about extending that invitation, right? In that engagement process, and not just once, but you have to continually invite, because I don't think that's the norm to invite. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. And I think, Christy, you're starting to move to the next question as well. So let's go ahead and move to that right now. What advice would you give to the community of Wardensville in this situation, and or what advice might you give to Joe that might have helped him? We're starting to think about, what is it that we could do to help reduce this conflict and to help more people get what they want, right? And I think Christy is like constant. When you said you got to continually remind people of the invitation and continually re-invite them, I think that's an example. Yeah. So what other advice might you give to either Wardensville, the community itself, and or to the newcomer in the community? What would you say?
This is Cheyenne, and some advice, which I didn't do myself because it would be really hard and awkward, but I would say start at the coffee shops, start getting to know people there.
Yeah. So tell the newcomers, get to know people at the coffee shop.
I think, this is Christy, a piece of advice that I think has been successful from those community members, it goes along with that inviting, but invite the newcomer to ride around with you and do that windshield survey, right? That's been successful, right? Because they see your community completely different than what you're used to, right? It's always lots of fun.
Yeah, so it's about maybe giving them a task, giving them something to do as well with that, so that they have some way of getting to know the community better and build relationships. Some of you had advice earlier for Joe. What else would you share with Joe Cap?
This is Kathy in Lemon. I guess I've noticed that when new people move into Lemon and they find their niche, like we have a young married couple that moved to town, and she is an avid reader, so she takes her children to the library. Her husband has gotten involved in other things, and I've gotten to know them because they've made themselves do things in our community, and now I don't consider them an outsider. They've been here 3 years, but they're my people. So I think the way you go about it when you first come is very important.
Okay, thanks. So it's about helping them connect in the community? So you want to think about this through the lens of your own community? What advice would you give a newcomer in your community? Or what advice would you give to community groups or different people who are in leadership positions in your community? Are the things that you would say, do?
Yeah, Josh from Freeman. I guess I would go back to the idea that they need to find the channels, figure out how to work through the channels of power and influence that are already in the social environment that they're coming into. So maybe like they need to understand how the power structures work in the community and who has the voices that can make things happen, and then work through those channels, like convince those people that this idea is good, and then progress their ideas through an intermediary. I don't think, I mean, really it's more about selling those leaders and those people with established voices than trying to make yourself a new voice in the community. And hopefully you have to hope that those community champions and those community advocates for your ideas are good enough and skillful enough and have the skill set to make it work, or you might not make it then even. So.
One thing I was going to say here in DeSmit, I'm talking to the organizations to do a volunteer fair with all the organizations to have a table set up and at the event center, and so that people can come from like 4 to 7 one day to so they can find out more about all the organizations and how they can volunteer for those. So I think that's a good way for newcomers then to find out what all there is there and who to talk to get involved with the organizations. Otherwise, you know, I'll give them the community guide and this is the organizations and this is who's the leader of it. But yet thought that was kind of a good way to get people involved.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Cheyenne, and I have kind of an interesting piece. I think it's awesome to invite, and engage, but don't overwhelm them. Because sometimes when you get a new person, or even if it's a young person moving back, people that are involved in things want to maybe push off their responsibilities and get someone new in, and all of a sudden you're the president of everything. So just don't overwhelm them.
Who tries to push off the current jobs and roles on committees and boards? Who does that type of thing?
No one.
Mike, I want to welcome, I think it's Holly from Belfouche, and is it Derek Sinner that's on the line too? Please, engage in the conversation if you have something to share.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. So anything else jumping out there? What else would you share with the newcomer or the community in your communities?
I think for the community side, my advice would be to practice giving people the benefit of the doubt. I think when that happens, we're able to be more successful. And when that is not given out, and when people start to mistrust others' intentions, it can really start to break things down in destructive ways. And I think that Joe did give people the benefit of the doubt, which you can tell through his interview. And I think to him, I would say, test your assumptions. He made up a lot of assumptions coming in about the community, and that could have helped him if he was to go in testing them.
Yeah, great advice.
And I know this is Paula, I've experienced in my own church community and in my own small town community that when there are new people that want to get involved and they enter the group, they might do things a little differently. And a lot of times that's not well received. And I've heard people say, we don't do things like that here. Rather than explaining, this is how we do it, and here's a role for you, and what would you like to do? There's no instruction in advance about how we do things. They're just slammed when they do try. And that pushes people away rather than welcomes people in.
this is Joan. Don't you think that sometimes, though, it's just nature, and I don't know that you're always going to change them. I mean, because I've been told, you know, people like you say in the church that worked in the kitchen and they didn't put the glasses back right, or they didn't do this right, and so they just up and quit. And you're not going to change those little ladies or those little men on doing it right. And I don't know, it maybe takes a pretty thick skin to be new in a community.
Yeah, there's some truth to that. And what I would remind everybody, just come back to thinking about what Jamie just said. You know, practice giving people the benefit of the doubt. And I think that we all need that reminder. I think that the newcomers need that reminder, and so do the people who are well established, because even the well-respected, good church ladies who are just doing good work need to be reminded of that. And I sometimes wonder if we don't remind them, we don't help them think about that, and they would feel bad if they knew what they were actually saying and were doing, because these things are having an issue. And I just want to share one quick story before we transition out of this. This was really troubling me because I had a conversation not long ago with somebody in a small town, this person was new to the community. They were started a business in that community, and it was going really well. They felt like they were a part of the community, but they had ideas about what to do in a business, in a building on Main Street that had closed, and they were sharing their ideas with the development corp and with other people, and they were sharing them in just general conversation, and those ideas weren't going anywhere. And so this person was starting to feel like they weren't valued. And I don't know the right answer or the way to help that person, but somehow, as Josh said, you work through the existing channels, and maybe we're also over there helping the existing channels recognize that things can be done outside of those existing channels. And so even when we make this claim, go grab your crowd, gather your crowd and just go do it, sometimes that's a threat to the existing power structure, and that isn't always viewed positively. So I just want to close by saying I really appreciated this conversation. I think we have some actionable items here that you've listed. We have them in the screen, some things that we can use as reminders. And I'd invite you to also, as we post the notes tomorrow and share the video, if there's something else that you had as a aha since this conversation started, please go ahead and share those in that post, okay? Good stuff, everybody, and thanks for getting started there with us here today. So Paula, let's go ahead and let's transition to our upcoming events.
So if you haven't yet signed up for the WIN Workforce Summit, it's being hosted by Lincoln and Minnehaha County Economic Development on August 23rd. They have a Facebook event set up, and if you need more information about that, you can email Nick Farsheim or contact myself, Paula at dakotaresources.org, and I'll get you some information. We've moved our housing gathering, our network retreat, to September 5th and 6th. And we'll talk about that a little bit more detail. Next slide. September 12th is the Northeast Regional Roundtable. It's going to be back in Aberdeen at the Smart Center. September 28th and 29th is Empower Sessions in Aberdeen. That is what we call our local communities conference, where we bring all of the communities and entrepreneurs and borrowers that we work with across the state of South Dakota together for some professional development and networking. October 30th and 31st, South Dakota Housing Development Authority is having their annual conference. That's always a really great conference, and they've been having some good trainings there as well. So if you're working on housing projects in your community, that's a good one to consider. And then November 7th and 8th, we'll be going to Wall for our network gathering around board training and governance. So put those on your calendar. And then as far as the housing gathering, so we were going to go to Thunder Valley. That's going to get postponed for probably till next spring or summer. But we've chosen the date, September 5th and 6th. And We're not sure where it's going to be held yet, but we have some topic ideas, and I'm just going to let Mike lead a little bit of that conversation about the surveys that you all completed and some topic ideas we came up with.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. And I would just highlight before we jump into this housing gathering conversation is that when we have those list of events, you saw that the WINS conference is on that list of dates. If you have something coming up that you want to list there, please let us know and we can help make people aware of it, post it to Basecamp or share it with us. But as Paula was saying about this housing gathering, we're thinking that we want to host it in a central part of the state. And in part of the reason that we'd like to do it in the central part of the state is it's obviously easier to get there. That sometimes means that we don't have that local community that we can focus on. So it might be in Pierre or it could be in Chamberlain or something like that. But we also want to do it in the middle of the state so that we make sure that we can try to get the housing resource providers there as well. One of the things that I'd like to propose as a part of our agenda is that reverse RFP process where you bring a topic that you want to present as a project. So in other words, you may want to do a new housing development in your community. You can share as much of that idea or project with people in the room, and the housing resource providers will then share how they can help you make that possible. It's been a very valuable process, so we're looking at having that at this gathering. And another one that emerged in the surveys is this idea of developing townhouses and some other transitional homes. It seems like there's an interest in having a place where seniors who might be looking to downsize into something smaller, and also having a place where maybe some newcomers who are coming to the community can move into a townhouse or something that they're maybe even renting for a while as a transitional type of housing. So those are the two ideas that we're kicking around with. And I'm going to just ask you, what do you think? Are those two things that might be strong on your list, and or is there something else? So I'm asking you if you want to echo, yeah, I want to do the reverse RFP, please share that. You can share it verbally and or also in the note section, the same with developing townhouses. Are those topics that are going to interest you in participating? Not seeing much action right now. Got one new comment, or maybe a few here. Interested in both, thank you, great. And what else is really pressing if this isn't it? Okay, another yes to both, great. Okay, reverse RFP, good. Yeah. Developing townhouses is one of the items that we're working on, good. Both, seems like we're getting some good feedback there then. Yeah, and is there something else? And we had you share previously in the last survey if there were some topics. This is another chance to say if there's something really important, please type it in and we'll try to see if we have consensus around that as well. Okay. All right. Thanks for the feedback that you were able to give us on that. Okay.
We always want to say thank you to our new leadership partner, the Reed Fund and Touchstone Energy Cooperatives. They help make these webinars possible, along with everything else that we do at Dakota Resources. And in the checkout, so I'm going to post today's link to the Survey Monkey as well. Go ahead and go out there and rank today's webinar. Let us know if this was a good format for you and what you took away from it. But what's one way, if you want to leave this in your chat or say it out loud before you leave, what's one way this has been helpful for you today?
And with that question, Paula, can we also say, and what else might you want to learn more about related to this topic? What was helpful and what might be a question that you have that you'd like to learn more about? So again, everybody, thanks for beginning to type those things into the chat box, and know that you're also able to share them verbally if you would prefer. Cheyenne has shared that we're not the only community that struggles with welcoming newcomers. Thanks. Joan, why not things we have done that have worked or didn't work to welcome newcomers? Some more specifics. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. You can try to dive into some more stuff like that.
Good. And thanks everybody for coming today. We weren't sure day after a holiday how many would show up, but you guys showed up in full force today, so we appreciate that. And you know, as you leave your comments, you can go ahead and check off. Thanks for spending an hour with us today, and thanks for your feedback. We always love that. Thanks, everybody.